drama, and death on Vong Son Plain, South Vietnam, where a squad of U.S. 8th Cavalry is ambushed by an entire regiment of Viet Cong guerrillas. The 8-man unit was on its way to help fellow GIs under enemy fire.
Kent State and the Vietnam Conflict Debate by Nick Brown, Laura McEwen, and Tyler Purcell.
Within the last 50 years, the Vietnam War clearly demonstrated how foreign policy, success or failure, can be greatly influenced by the sentiment of the American people at large. During the Vietnam War time period, the incident in Kent State, perhaps more than any other incident, illustrates this point.
We entered Vietnam just to aid the South Vietnamese because the North Vietnamese were communist. We did not want all of Asia becoming communist.
The non-communist forces were the United States, South Vietnam, North Korea, Australia, the Philippines, New Zealand, Thailand, the Kingdom of Laos, and the Republic of China.
The communist forces involved in the Vietnam War were North Vietnam, the People's Republic of China, the Soviet Union, North Korea, and the infamous guerrilla warfare-style fighters of North Vietnam, the Viet Cong. We were there in Vietnam mostly just to aid, but we turned into a fighting force. We entered to prevent communism from spreading across the entire world.
We were first sent in as advisors in 1965. We gave the South Vietnamese ammunition, supplies, and weapons, but also provided medical attention for wounded soldiers. In 1969, Richard Nixon became the president with his main attention on ending the Vietnam War. Richard Nixon said new government would end the war. He made this promise to the United States people. On April 30th, President Nixon announced his movement into Cambodia. Cambodia was officially neutral in the Vietnam War, and the North Vietnamese were using it to get into South Vietnam. We decided it was time to invade and bomb Cambodia.
This angered thousands of Americans. However, the U.S. government proceeded anyway.
The students at Kent State decided to plan a protest on May 1st.
On May 1st, the protests were not violent. The students shouted against the war and Vice President Agnew. They even buried a copy of the United States Constitution. Late at night, the students did get rowdy in the streets of Kent. The mayor had to order a citywide curfew.
Members of the Black United Students speak out about the events at other colleges in Ohio.
On May 2nd, the city of Kent was in a state of turmoil. People helped clean up the city after a small group of students came in and virtually destroyed downtown Kent the night before.
Some Kent State University students even helped clean up the shops that their fellow classmates destroyed. Rumors and threats had started to float around that certain shops needed to put up anti-war posters up in their shops or they might get burned out.
The mayor of Kent put a curfew of 8 p.m. to dawn. He also called the National Guardsmen to come to the campus in case protests became violent.
About 600 students and other protesters got together a little after 8 o'clock and burned down the ROTC building. The firemen were called, and when they came, protesters stoned them. The police force showed up to defend the firemen and threw tear gas at the protesters. It was about midnight when order was completely restored. Clearly, the burning of the ROTC building represented a shift from peaceful civil unrest and debate into a far more grave situation involving destruction of property and potential violence.
The Governor James Rhodes said to break up any gatherings about the war between students in Kent. The governor decided the situation had gone far enough and he was willing to employ every force of law that he had.
At about 8 o'clock, a group of students were ordered to disperse, but just move closer to the main street. A curfew was ordered at 11 o'clock, but most protesters just ignored this. 104 students were arrested by the end of the day for violation of curfew or failure to disperse.
At about 11:50 a.m., people began to get together and protest. There were about 2,000 students after the classes let out at noon. In an attempt to break up the protests, a jeep drove through the commons with a police officer with a bullhorn shouting, "Assembly is unlawful. The crowd must disperse at this time. This is an order." Unsurprisingly, the students only shouted insults back, such as, "Pigs off our campus." Rocks were thrown at the jeep.
With M79 grenade launchers, guardsmen launched tear gas at the crowd. Canisters were thrown back at the guardsmen. The guardsmen began marching with bayonets and gas masks at the same time the demonstrators began coming back at them. The guardsmen took control of Blanket Hill while firing tear gas. Rocks and other objects continued to be thrown at the guard.
Demonstrators cornered the guard and pummeled them with rocks. One .45 caliber pistol was fired over the student's head, with no intention to wound or kill.
Approximately 12:24, the guardsmen reached the crest of Blanket Hill. In about 10 to 12 seconds, there was a continual gunfire and then seconds of silence. 4 students are dead and 9 are wounded.
Put ragged clothes upon your back and sleep upon the ground. And tell police about your rights as they drag you down. And ask them as they lead you to some deserted door. Yes, I know you're set for fighting, but what are you fighting for? But the hardest thing
None of the 4 students who were killed were within 100 feet of the guard. Only 2 of the 9 students who were injured were within 100 feet of the guard. One of the injured is paralyzed from the neck down.
Many students wanted to kill the soldiers after the shootings of the students. Several people had to settle down the angered protesters who were ready to die for what they hoped would avenge their fallen brothers and sisters. The students were scared. Armed officers had just gunned down their classmates for protesting a war they thought was unjust. They did not know what these men would do next.
At 1:20 p.m., the president of the campus closed the university for the rest of the week. This is the day that we remember as the day that 4 students were killed and 9 injured. The people of Kent remember it as the darkest day in their city, and the families of the dead or injured remember it as the day that they lost or nearly lost their little girl or boy.
The other thing I remember is being really scared. And it was, although it was almost like exciting to be there because something was happening, I also felt scared because, there were guns there. And I also remembered, I remembered going to the parking lot, and as soon as the gunshots fired, I hit the ground. If you go across the parking lot and towards the dorm, I had crossed that street and I was just a little bit onto the grass, and it was an immediate reaction, just falling to the ground. And then I went back to my dorm and I remember because I put my jacket back and people at the dorm go, "What are you doing? Why are you going out there?" I go, "Well, things were happening out there, and this." I remember one of the girls in the hallway, "Don't go out there. You shouldn't go out there. It's dangerous." And I go, "I'm going to go see what happens." So I walked back, and then what I remember seeing that really freaked me out was this guy came up to me and he goes, "Look what they killed him with." And he held out his hand like this. I don't know if you could see the bullets they used, and I don't know about bullets, shells, and how big, but it was as big as the palm of his hand.
The days after the May 4th tragedy, the news crews covered the university heavily. The trials of the guardsmen ended with no punishment for the National Guard of Ohio. They said they were threatened by the students, yet in fact the guardsmen who shot were over 60 feet away from the students.
Perhaps it is best that we do not forget. We now know that tragedy strikes when we are least expecting it. People will always remember Kent State, but when it first happened, people did not know what to think. Was it worth losing the lives of 4 kids, 58,209 men, never being able to return home to their daughters, sons, wives, grandchildren, fathers, mothers, or friends? Was it worth injuring 9 kids, some that will never recover from their injuries, or 153,303 men wounded? Though we went to try to help, a good reason to start off, was it worth continuing and losing the lives of our loved ones? At Kent State, who was wrong? The protesting students, the students throwing objects, the guards, the students who were just passing by, the guards who shot, whether they were off command or on command, who was right?